You feel overwhelmed by daily pressures that seem to multiply endlessly, and every setback at work or home shakes your confidence and disrupts your inner peace. The stress follows you everywhere, affecting your sleep, your relationships, and your ability to think clearly while you watch others maintain their composure under similar or even greater pressures. I am Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who maintained unshakable inner strength while ruling the most powerful empire in history, bearing the weight of millions of lives during plagues, wars, and constant political turmoil. The Stoic principles I developed through my daily practice will give you a fortress of calm that no external circumstance can penetrate. Using the same philosophy that sustained me through the darkest times of ruling an empire. What worked too. Maintain peace of mind while governing millions can work for anyone facing modern stress and uncertainty. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless Stoic wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to see how far the need for inner strength and daily tranquility has spread across our world. I never wanted to be emperor. When Antoninus Pius adopted me as his heir, I felt the weight of destiny settle on my shoulders, like a heavy cloak that I could never remove. At 26, I was a philosopher at heart, content to spend my days studying the teachings of Epictetus and contemplating the nature of virtue. But fate had other plans. The moment I first wore the purple, I understood a truth that would shape every day of my reign. External power is worthless without inner mastery. Here I was, commander of the world's greatest legions, ruler of millions, from Britain to the Euphrates, yet I felt utterly powerless against the chaos swirling in my own mind. The senators scheming, the barbarians pressing our borders, the endless stream of decisions that could affect thousands of lives. It all threatened to overwhelm me completely. That first night as emperor, I couldn't sleep. I paced my chambers, feeling the crushing responsibility of absolute power. How could one man possibly govern such vastness? How could I make decisions worthy of the trust placed in me? It was then that I turned to philosophy, not as an academic exercise, but as a desperate need for survival. I began to understand what my teacher, Junius Rusticus, had tried to show me. The only empire that truly mattered was the empire of my own mind. While I could command armies, I could not control their loyalty. While I could issue edicts, I could not guarantee their effectiveness. While I could punish or reward, I could not change the hearts of men. But I could master my own thoughts, my own reactions, my own character. This became my daily practice, not ruling the empire, but ruling myself. Every morning before the first petitioner arrived, I would sit in quiet reflection, reminding myself of what was within my control and what was not. I could control my effort, my intentions, my responses to events. I could not control outcomes, other people's actions, or the countless variables that shape history. The barbarian invasions along the Danube taught me this lesson brutally. We could prepare our defenses, train our soldiers, plan our strategies, but we could not guarantee victory. What we could guarantee was that we would face whatever came with courage, wisdom, and justice. Whether we won or lost, we would remain true to our principles. I learned to find refuge in philosophy the way other men find refuge in wine or women. When the plague struck Rome and bodies filled the streets, I turned to my evening reflections on mortality and acceptance. When court conspiracies threatened my reign, I practiced the discipline of perception, seeing events clearly without the distortion of fear or anger. The purple cloak became my teacher. Its weight reminded me daily that true strength comes from within, that leadership is service, and that power is most noble when it serves virtue. Through ruling an empire, I discovered how to rule myself. Through accepting external burdens, I found internal freedom. This was my awakening. The philosopher and the emperor were not separate roles, but one calling lived fully in every moment. Asterisk, asterisk, within every human being lies an impregnable fortress, a citadel of the mind that no external force can breach if you learn to defend it properly. I discovered this truth during the darkest hours of my reign, when enemies pressed our borders and plague ravaged our cities. While I could not control these calamities, I found I could retreat to an inner sanctuary where no barbarian army could follow. The mind, you see, is the only territory you truly govern. Senators may oppose your policies, friends may betray your trust, and fortune may strip away your possessions, but your thoughts remain your own domain. This is where you must establish your primary residence, not in any palace of stone and marble, but in the unassailable fortress of your own consciousness. I learned to build this citadel through daily practice. Each morning, before the demands of empire could assault my peace, I would withdraw to this inner sanctuary and remind myself of what belonged to me and what did not. My body could be harmed, but my character could not, lest I permitted it. My reputation could be attacked, but my integrity remained intact if I chose to preserve it. My plans could be thwarted, but my principles could not be morbidized. I held them firm. The walls of this inner fortress are built from clear thinking and honest self-examination. When news arrived that Germanic tribes had crossed the Danube in force, my first instinct was panic, but I had trained myself to pause, to retreat to my citadel, and to examine the situation with clarity. What exactly was within my power to influence? I could marshal our defenses, inspire our troops, and make sound strategic decisions. The outcome of battle remained beyond my control, but my response to whatever outcome emerged was entirely mine to determine. This practice saved my sanity during the Antonine Plague, when death stalked every street in Rome. I could not stop the disease, could not save every life, could not prevent the economic devastation that followed. But within my inner citadel, I found the strength to continue governing justly, to make difficult decisions with wisdom rather than fear, and to model courage for a terrified populace. The citadel grows stronger with each assault it repels. Every insult that fails to wound you, every setback that fails to break your spirit, every loss that fails to destroy your peace, these become stones in your fortress walls. I welcomed opposition and difficulty because they provided opportunities to test and strengthen my inner defenses. But here is what many misunderstand about the inner citadel. It is not a place of cold isolation or bitter endurance. Within these walls, I found warmth, joy, and profound connection to the cosmic order. When you know that your essential self cannot be touched by external circumstances, you become free to engage fully with the world. You can love without fear of loss, work without anxiety about results, and lead without concern for personal consequences. This fortress is not built in a day. It requires the patient work of years, stone upon stone, practice upon practice. You must train yourself to recognize when you have wandered outside its walls into the dangerous territory of external attachment. You must learn to retreat quickly to your stronghold when emotions threaten to overwhelm reason. The key to this citadel is understanding that you are not your circumstances, your possessions, or even your relationships. You are the conscious observer of these things, the decision maker who chooses how to respond to them. This observer, this chooser, this essential youth, this cannot be conquered unless you surrender it willingly. Build your citadel, stock it with virtue, wisdom, and clear perception. Make it your true home, and you will find that no storm can disturb your peace. Asterisk, asterisk, most human suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. During my campaigns along the Danube, I watched seasoned soldiers transform minor setbacks into crushing defeats through the power of their own interpretation. A tactical withdrawal became cowardice in their minds. A delayed supply convoy became abandonment by Rome. A temporary alliance with local tribes became betrayal of Roman honor. I learned to strip away these emotional decorations and see events as they truly weren't either good nor bad in themselves, but simply occurrences to which I could choose my response. This discipline of perception became one of my most powerful tools for maintaining equilibrium in the chaos of war and governance. When word reached me that a conspiracy was forming among the senators to challenge my authority, my initial reaction was the familiar surge of anger and fear that such news naturally provokes. But I had trained myself to pause and examine this situation with the cold clarity of a philosopher. What were the facts? Certain senators were meeting privately and expressing dissatisfaction with imperial policies. What was my interpretation? That they were ungrateful traitors threatening the stability of Rome. What was reality? Human beings exercising their natural tendency to discuss and debate governance, as they had done since the Republic began. This practice of separating facts from interpretation transformed how I governed. Instead of reacting to the emotional weight of my assumptions, I could respond to the actual situation before me. The senators were not evil conspirators, they were concerned citizens expressing legitimate worries about imperial direction. This perception allowed me to address their concerns through dialogue rather than punishment, strengthening the empire rather than dividing it. The discipline requires constant vigilance because our minds naturally add meaning to neutral events. When rain delayed our military advance, inexperienced officers saw divine displeasure or strategic disaster. I learned to see moisture falling from clouds, nothing more, nothing less. This clarity allowed us to adapt our plans rationally rather than abandoning them in superstitious panic. I practiced this discipline in small daily matters as well as great affairs of state. When a favorite horse died, I observed my mind trying to create a narrative of loss and sadness. But what had actually occurred? A biological organism had ceased functioning, a natural process that affects all living things. My emotional attachment was creating suffering where none inherently existed. The horse itself experienced no loss. Only my resistance to natural change caused my distress. This is not to say that I became cold or unfeeling. Rather, I learned to distinguish between appropriate emotional responses and unnecessary suffering. When soldiers under my command died in battle, I grieved for their sacrifice and honored their service. But I did not torture myself with guilt about decisions I had made carefully based on the best information available. I could not control the outcome of battle, only the wisdom and courage I brought to each decision. The practice extends to how we perceive ourselves. When critics attacked my policies or philosophers questioned my understanding of Stoic principles, I learned to examine these challenges without the distortion of wounded pride. Were their criticisms accurate? If so, I could learn from them. If not, I could disregard them without taking offense. My worth as a human being did not depend on universal approval or perfect understanding. This clarity of perception becomes particularly valuable during times of apparent crisis. When plague struck Rome and people called it divine punishment for imperial policies, I saw a disease spreading through predictable patterns of contagion. This realistic assessment allowed us to implement practical measures: quarantine, medical care, food distribution, rather than wasting time on ineffective rituals of appeasement. Train yourself to see clearly. When someone offends you, observe exactly what they said and did, without adding your interpretation of their motives or character. When plans fail, examine precisely what happened, without creating stories about unfairness or inadequacy. When success comes, notice the specific actions and circumstances that contributed, without inflating your ego with narratives of special favor or exceptional ability. Clear perception is the foundation of wise action. See truly, and you will respond appropriately to whatever life presents. Every morning before dawn, while Rome still slept, and before the first petitioner arrived at the palace gates, I claimed the most important hour of my day. This was not time stolen from my duties. As emperor, it was preparation that made all my duties possible. In those quiet moments, I built the philosophical foundation that would support whatever challenges the day might bring. I would rise and sit in my private chamber, not as Marcus Aurelius, the ruler of the world, but simply as a human being preparing to live with virtue. The purple robes and golden laurels remained on their stands. In these moments, I needed only my capacity for thought and my commitment to wisdom. My morning practice began with remembering my mortality. Today I will die, I would tell myself, not with morbid fascination, but with liberating clarity. This reminder freed me from the petty concerns that trap most people. When you truly understand that this might be your last day on earth, you naturally focus on what matters most. Will I spend precious hours worrying about a senator's slight, or will I use this time to serve justice? Will I waste energy on anger over circumstances beyond my control, or will I invest it in actions that reflect my highest values? Next, I would prepare myself for the people I would encounter. Today, I will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. I would remind myself, this was not pessimism, but practical preparation. When you expect humans to behave according to their nature, sometimes noble, sometimes petty, often confused, you are not disappointed by their shortcomings or surprised by their failures. Instead, you can respond with patience and understanding. I would spend time considering what aspects of the coming day lay within my control and what did not. Could I control whether the Senate would approve my proposals? No. But I could control the wisdom and care with which I crafted them. Could I control whether our military campaigns would succeed? No, but I could control the strategic thinking and moral courage I brought to leadership decisions. This practice prevented me from wasting mental energy on outcomes I could not influence. During these morning hours, I would also reflect on the fundamental principles that should guide my actions. Justice, treating each person fairly regardless of their status or usefulness to me. Courage, facing difficult decisions without being swayed by fear or comfort. Temperance, maintaining moderation in all things, never indulging excess, even when unlimited power made excess possible. Wisdom, seeking truth and acting according to reason rather than emotion or impulse. I found that visualizing specific challenges helped prepare my mind for right action. If I knew I must meet with hostile barbarian leaders that day, I would imagine maintaining dignity and fairness even if they showed neither. If difficult judicial decisions awaited, I would prepare myself to choose justice over popularity, truth over convenience. This mental rehearsal strengthened my resolve and clarified my intentions before the heat of actual events could cloud my judgment. The morning practice also included gratitude, not for my privileges as emperor, but for the fundamental gifts available to any human being. I was grateful for my capacity to reason, my ability to choose virtue over vice, my opportunity to serve something greater than myself. I was grateful for teachers who had shared wisdom, for books that preserved the thoughts of great minds, for the natural order that provided examples of harmony and purpose. This daily ritual transformed how I approached leadership. Instead of reactive governing driven by immediate pressures, I could lead from a foundation of philosophical clarity. When crises arose, and they arose constantly, I had already established the principles that would guide my response. I did not need to discover my values in the moment of decision. I had reinforced them in the calm of morning preparation. The practice requires no special location or elaborate ceremony. Whether you command an empire or manage a household, whether you lead armies or work alone, you can claim this sacred time each morning. Rise before your obligations begin, sit quietly, and prepare your mind for virtue. Remember your mortality, expect human imperfection, focus on your sphere of control, reinforce your principles, and cultivate gratitude. This morning foundation will support you through whatever storms the day may bring. Death was my constant companion during my reign, not as a grim spectre to be feared, but as a wise counselor who taught me how to live fully. The Antonine Plague that swept through the empire claimed thousands daily, reminding me with brutal clarity that neither purple robes nor imperial power could grant immortality. This proximity to death became one of my greatest teachers. Each morning when I reminded myself, today I will die, I was not indulging in morbid contemplation, but engaging in the most practical exercise imaginable. When you truly accept that this day might be your last, every decision becomes clearer, every moment more precious, every interaction more meaningful. The petty concerns that usually consume our mental energy status, accumulation, reputation suddenly reveal themselves as the distractions they truly are. I learned this lesson viscerally during the Germanic campaigns when death stalked our camps nightly, watching brave soldiers fall beside me, seeing commanders I had trusted with my life reduced to stillness in a moment. I understood that my own mortality was not some distant theoretical concern, but an immediate reality that could arrive with the next arrow or sword thrust. This knowledge did not paralyze me with fear. Instead, it liberated me from fear entirely. When you accept death as natural and inevitable, you stop wasting energy trying to prevent the unpreventable. Instead, you can focus entirely on what matters, living with virtue while you have the chance. I stopped postponing difficult conversations, delaying important decisions, or avoiding necessary actions because they might be uncomfortable. If today might be my last, I wanted to spend it acting according to my highest principles rather than my lowest impulses. The practice of memento mori, remembering death, became my guide for daily choices. When advisors urged me to delay justice, to avoid political complications, I would ask myself, if I died tonight, would I be satisfied having chosen political convenience over moral duty? When personal comfort conflicted with imperial responsibility, I would consider, what would I regret more on my deathbed, a few moments of ease, or a lifetime of knowing I had shirked my obligations? This constant awareness of mortality also taught me to appreciate the present moment with extraordinary intensity. During rare, peaceful evenings when I could sit quietly and watch the sunset over Rome, I experienced a gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. Not because these moments were permanent, precisely because they were not. The fleeting nature of beauty and peace made them infinitely more precious. I began to see death not as the enemy of life, but as life's most essential component. Just as a musical composition gains meaning from the spaces between notes, human existence derives significance from its brevity. If we lived forever, nothing would be urgent, nothing would be precious, nothing would compel us to choose wisely or love deeply. Death gives weight to our decisions and intensity to our affections. The plague taught me that death comes to emperor and slave alike, to the virtuous and the vicious, to the young and the old. This equality in mortality revealed the fundamental unity of human experience beneath all our artificial distinctions. When I stood beside the funeral pyres of soldiers who had died serving Rome, I did not see inferiors whose deaths mattered less than mine would. I saw fellow travelers on the same brief journey, deserving of the same dignity and respect I hoped to receive. This perspective transformed how I governed. Instead of building monuments to ensure my remembrance, a futile attempt to cheat mortality, I focused on creating policies that would serve justice long after my bones had turned to dust. Instead of hoarding power for its own sake, I used authority as a tool for implementing virtue. If my reign was temporary, at least it would be meaningful. The daily contemplation of death also revealed the absurdity of many things that had once seemed terribly important. When you regularly consider that this conversation might be your last, you naturally speak more honestly and kindly. When you remember that this meal might be your final one, you taste it more fully and waste less. When you acknowledge that this embrace might be the final one you share with someone you love, you hold them more closely and appreciate them more deeply. But perhaps the greatest gift that facing death daily gave me was the elimination of fear about everything else. What could possibly frighten someone who had already accepted the worst that could happen? Political opposition, military setbacks, personal criticism, none of these could disturb the peace of mind that comes from embracing mortality completely. Death will come to you whether you acknowledge it or ignore it. Acknowledge it and let it teach you how to live with courage, urgency, and profound appreciation for the magnificent brevity of human existence. The greatest battles I fought were not against Germanic tribes or plague, but against the storms of emotion that threatened daily to overwhelm my reason. Learning to master these internal tempests became as crucial to my success as emperor as any military strategy or political alliance. The difference between feeling emotions and being controlled by them determined whether I governed wisely or reactively. I discovered that emotions are not commands, but information. When anger arose at news of a military defeat, I learned to observe this anger as I would observe weather, noting its presence without allowing it to dictate my actions. The anger itself contained valuable data. It indicated that something important to me was threatened, that action might be needed, that my expectations had not aligned with reality. But the emotion was not the action I should take. It was simply raw material for rational consideration. During one particularly challenging period when both military pressures and political opposition seemed overwhelming, I felt despair threatening to consume my ability to function. Rather than fighting this feeling or surrendering to it, I practiced what I came to call emotional observation. I would sit quietly and study the despair as a philosopher studies a natural phenomena. Where did I feel it in my body? How did it affect my breathing, my posture, my thinking? What thoughts accompanied this emotion? What circumstances had triggered it? This practice revealed something remarkable. Emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. When I stopped resisting despair or feeding it with catastrophic thinking, it would naturally begin to fade, like storm clouds moving across the sky. The feeling itself was not the problem. My relationship with the feeling determined whether it became suffering or simply experience. I learned to create space between emotional impulse and response. When a senator delivered a particularly sharp criticism of my policies, my immediate reaction was defensive anger. But I had trained myself to pause in that crucial moment between feeling and action. In that pause, I could ask, is this anger justified? Will acting from anger serve wisdom and justice? What response would I choose if I were completely calm? This space between stimulus and response became sacred to me. Within that pause lived my freedom, my ability to choose virtue over impulse, wisdom over reactivity, justice over personal preference. The untrained mind moves directly from emotional trigger to automatic reaction, but the disciplined mind inserts conscious choice into this process. I developed a practice of evening emotional review that proved invaluable for developing this mastery. Each night before sleep, I would examine the emotional challenges of the day like a general reviewing battles. When had I been reactive rather than responsive? What emotions had I felt, and how had I handled them? Where had I succeeded in maintaining equilibrium, and where had I been swept away by feeling? This review was not self-flagellation, but education. I was studying the patterns of my own emotional life so I could respond more skillfully in the future. I noticed that certain types of criticism triggered anger more quickly than others. That fatigue made me more susceptible to despair. That political pressure created anxiety that clouded my judgment. Understanding these patterns allowed me to prepare for emotional challenges before they arose. The Stoic approach to emotions is often misunderstood as suppression or elimination of feeling. Nothing could be further from the truth. I felt joy at successful harvests, sorrow at soldiers' deaths, love for my family, and even appropriate anger at injustice. The discipline was not in avoiding these feelings, but in experiencing them without being controlled by them. I learned to distinguish between initial, emotional responses, which are largely automatic and beyond our immediate control, and our sustained emotional states, which we can influence through our thoughts and choices. When news of a disaster reached me, I might feel an immediate flash of distress. This was natural and unavoidable. But whether I spent the following hours in productive concern that led to helpful action or in useless worry that paralyzed effective response, this was entirely within my power to determine. The practice of emotional mastery also revealed the connection between thoughts and feelings. Catastrophic thinking created anxiety, resentful thoughts fed anger, and grateful thoughts cultivated joy. By learning to direct my mental attention consciously rather than allowing it to wander randomly, I gained significant influence over my emotional experience. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that emotional mastery is not about becoming invulnerable, but about becoming resilient. The goal was not to avoid emotional pain, but to move through it skillfully, learning from it without being destroyed by it. When genuine grief came at the death of loved ones or the suffering of my people, I allowed myself to feel it fully while maintaining my commitment to virtue and responsibility. Master your emotions not by suppressing them, but by understanding them, not by avoiding them, but by choosing consciously how to respond to them. In this mastery lies the difference between being a passenger in your own life and being its wise conductor. The heaviest burden of my reign was not the weight of decisions or the pressure of expectations, but the daily requirement to perform countless duties that I would never have chosen for myself. Administrative meetings that dragged through tedious details, ceremonial functions that served protocol rather than purpose, diplomatic negotiations with people whose values I did not share. These obligations filled my days and could have filled them with resentment if I had not learned the secret of willing service. Early in my reign, I struggled bitterly with this aspect of imperial life. I was a philosopher forced to spend most of my time on matters that seemed far removed from the pursuit of wisdom. I was a man who valued simplicity and contemplation, trapped in a role that demanded constant public performance. I would lie awake at night wondering why fate had placed me in a position so poorly suited to my natural inclinations. This resentment was poison that affected not only my happiness, but my effectiveness as a leader. When you perform necessary tasks with grudging reluctance, you do them poorly. When you approach obligations with bitterness, you communicate that bitterness to everyone around you. I realized that I faced a choice. I could spend my entire reign fighting against my circumstances, making both myself and my subjects miserable, or I could find a way to embrace my duties with genuine willingness. The transformation began when I stopped thinking of imperial obligations as interruptions of my real life and started seeing them as my real life. This was not philosophical surrender, but philosophical realization. These duties were not keeping me from living meaningfully. They were the very means through which meaning could be expressed. Every tedious meeting was an opportunity to practice patience. Every difficult negotiation was a chance to embody justice. Every ceremonial function was a moment to demonstrate virtue in public. I learned to find the deeper purpose hidden within apparently meaningless tasks. When reviewing endless grain distribution reports, I was not simply processing bureaucratic paperwork. I was ensuring that Roman citizens would not starve, that families would remain together, that social order would be preserved. When enduring hours of senatorial speeches filled with political posturing, I was not wasting time. I was modeling the respect for democratic discourse that keeps empires from becoming tyrannies. The key insight was that duty and personal preference are entirely separate categories. My obligation as emperor existed independently of my feelings about it. The people of Rome needed competent leadership, whether I enjoyed providing it or not. Justice required implementation, whether I found the process interesting or tedious. The choice was not between duty and freedom, but between performing duty with resentment or with acceptance. This shift in perspective transformed even the most mundane obligations into opportunities for character development. I began to approach administrative work as a form of meditation, bringing the same focused attention to budget reviews that I brought to philosophical contemplation. I discovered that any task, no matter how seemingly trivial, could become meaningful. When performed with care and consciousness, the practice extended beyond official duties to the everyday requirements of human life: eating meals when hungry, sleeping when tired, bathing when dirty. These biological necessities could be performed grudgingly as interruptions of more important activities, or they could be embraced as part of the natural rhythm of existence. I learned to bring mindful attention to simple tasks, finding satisfaction in doing them well rather than rushing through them to reach supposedly more significant activities. I also discovered that resentment about duty often masks fear about competence. When I resented having to make difficult judicial decisions, part of my resistance came from anxiety about making mistakes that could harm innocent people. When I dreaded military planning sessions, some of my reluctance stemmed from fear that my strategic thinking might be inadequate. By acknowledging these fears honestly, I could address them directly through better preparation and consultation with experts, rather than avoiding them through resentment. The transformation was not instant or complete. Even after years of practice, I still occasionally felt frustration with imperial obligations that kept me from philosophical study. But I learned to notice this resentment quickly and redirect my attention to the opportunities for virtue that every duty contained. Instead of asking why must I do this, I learned to ask how can I do this excellently. This approach created an unexpected result. Duties performed with acceptance and care became sources of satisfaction rather than burdens to be endured. When I approached administrative work with the same attention I gave to writing my meditations, the work itself became a form of philosophical practice. When I treated ceremonial functions as opportunities to demonstrate imperial dignity and Roman values, they became meaningful expressions of my deepest beliefs. The ultimate secret of duty without resentment is recognizing that we are always serving something larger than ourselves, whether we acknowledge it or not. The question is not whether we will serve, but whether we will serve willingly and excellently. Choose willing service and transform every obligation into an opportunity for virtue. In my years as emperor, I encountered every variety of difficult person imaginable: senators who plotted against me while smiling to my face, generals who valued personal glory over strategic wisdom, courtiers who spread malicious gossip, barbarian kings who negotiated in bad faith, and citizens who blamed imperial policies for every misfortune in their lives. Learning to interact with such people without losing my equilibrium or compromising my principles became one of my most essential skills. The first lesson I learned was that difficult behavior in others reveals their character, not mine. When a senator launched into a vicious personal attack during a public debate, my initial impulse was to respond with equal venom. But I had trained myself to pause and consider, what did his attack actually tell me? It revealed his own anger, fear, or political desperation. It said nothing about my worth as a person or leader. His words were his responsibility. My response was mine. This shift in perspective was liberating. Instead of taking others' behavior personally, I began to see it as information about their internal state. The general who constantly challenged my military decisions was not necessarily questioning my competence. He might be struggling with his own insecurities or competing loyalties. The courtier who spread rumors about my family was not revealing terrible truths about us. She was demonstrating her own character and perhaps seeking attention or influence through destructive means. I developed what I came to think of as compassionate observation, the ability to witness difficult behavior with understanding rather than reactivity. When dealing with particularly challenging individuals, I would remind myself that they were acting according to their current level of wisdom and virtue. If they possessed greater wisdom, they would behave differently. If they understood virtue more clearly, they would choose better actions. Their limitations were not personal attacks on me, but simply the natural result of their own internal state. This did not mean accepting inappropriate behavior or failing to set necessary boundaries. When a provincial governor was discovered taking bribes, my understanding of his circumstances did not prevent me from removing him from office and ensuring he faced appropriate consequences. Compassion for his weakness as a human being coexisted with firm action to protect the people under his authority. I learned to separate the person from their behavior, maintaining respect for their fundamental humanity while refusing to enable their destructive choices. The barbarian king who repeatedly violated peace treaties was still a human being worthy of basic dignity, but his actions required military response to protect Roman citizens. I could recognize his behavior as the result of his circumstances, an upbringing while still taking firm action to counter it. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that difficult people often serve as our greatest teachers. The senator who criticized my policies forced me to examine them more carefully, sometimes revealing weaknesses I had missed. The general who questioned my strategies compelled me to articulate my reasoning more clearly, strengthening my decision-making process. The courtier who spread gossip taught me about the importance of maintaining dignity under attack. I began to see challenging relationships as opportunities for practicing virtue. Patience with the tediously verbose advisor, justice toward the obviously biased accuser, courage in facing the hostile critic. These interactions became training grounds for character development. Instead of avoiding difficult people, I learned to approach them as the universe's way of testing and strengthening my philosophical principles. The practice that proved most valuable was seeking to understand what each difficult person was actually trying to achieve beneath their problematic behavior. The aggressive senator might be genuinely concerned about imperial policies affecting his constituents. The scheming courtier might be desperately trying to secure her family's future in an uncertain political environment. The challenging general might be struggling to maintain his troops' respect in impossible circumstances. When I could identify the legitimate need or concern driving someone's difficult behavior, I could often address that underlying issue directly, rather than simply reacting to its surface manifestations. This approach transformed many antagonistic relationships into productive partnerships. As people realized I was genuinely interested in solving problems rather than simply defending my position, I also learnt the importance of maintaining my own center when dealing with difficult people. If I allowed their emotional state to determine mine, I became part of the problem rather than part of the solution. By staying grounded in my own principles and responding from virtue rather than reactivity, I could often help de-escalate conflicts and find constructive paths forward. The ultimate insight was that difficult people are simply people doing their best with the tools they currently possess. Those tools might be inadequate. Their best might fall far short of what the situation requires. But understanding this allowed me to respond with wisdom rather than anger. When you see difficult behavior as a symptom of limitation rather than an attack on you personally, you can address it more skillfully and maintain your own peace of mind. Remember that everyone you encounter is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying burdens you cannot see, and operating from a perspective shaped by experiences you have not shared. This understanding does not excuse harmful behavior, but it allows you to respond to it with both firmness and compassion. Asterisk. Nothing tested my philosophical convictions more severely than witnessing and experiencing injustice. During my reign, I saw loyal servants betrayed by those they trusted, honest officials punished for refusing bribes they were expected to take, and brave soldiers dying while cowards received honors. I myself faced false accusations, unfair criticism, and deliberate misrepresentation of my actions and motives. Learning to respond to injustice without being corrupted by bitterness became one of my greatest challenges and most important achievements. The natural human response to injustice is outrage, and I felt this response many times. When news reached me that a trusted governor had been executed by rebels despite negotiating in good faith, my immediate reaction was fury at the unfairness of it all. When political opponents spread lies about my motives for military campaigns, knowing their accusations were false, I wanted to strike back with equal dishonesty. These reactions were human and understandable, but I learned they were also dangerous to my own character and ineffective as solutions. My Stoic training taught me to examine injustice from a broader perspective. What appears unjust from our limited viewpoint might serve purposes we cannot perceive from our position within events. The good man who suffers undeserved punishment might inspire others to greater virtue through his dignified response. The corrupt official who escapes immediate consequences might face greater accountability in ways we cannot foresee. The cosmic order operates according to principles larger than our immediate understanding. This perspective did not make me passive in the face of wrongdoing. When I could act to prevent or correct injustice, I did so vigorously. When provincial governors abused their authority, I removed them. When soldiers were cheated of their pay, I ensured they received what they earned. When laws proved inadequate to protect the innocent, I worked to improve them. But I learned to take these actions from a sense of duty rather than personal outrage, and I accepted that my efforts would not eliminate all unfairness from the world. The most difficult lesson was learning to maintain my own integrity regardless of how others behaved toward me. When critics accused me of tyranny for decisions made to protect the empire, I had to resist the temptation to abandon careful deliberation in favor of popular choices. When allies betrayed my trust for personal advantage, I had to continue extending trust to new allies rather than becoming cynically suspicious of everyone. Other people's choices could not be allowed to determine my character. I discovered that injustice often reveals itself as an opportunity for virtue. When false accusations were made against me, I could practice the virtue of patience by responding with facts rather than anger. When unfair criticism was leveled at my policies, I could demonstrate wisdom by examining whether any valid concerns were hidden within the distorted attacks. When enemies acted dishonorably, I could show courage by maintaining honorable behavior. Regardless of their example, the practice that proved most valuable was focusing on my response rather than others' actions. I could not control whether people would act justly toward me, but I could control whether I acted justly toward them. I could not prevent all unfairness, but I could ensure that I was not the source of unfairness to others. This shift in focus, from external events to internal choices, restored my sense of agency and purpose even in situations where I was powerless to change outcomes. I also learned to distinguish between justice and revenge. Justice seeks to restore proper order and prevent future harm. Revenge seeks to inflict suffering on those who have caused suffering. When dealing with officials who had abused their positions, I focused on removing them from opportunities to cause further harm and making restitution to their victims. I did not seek to make them suffer proportionally to the suffering they had caused, That was neither my role nor an effective solution. Perhaps the most profound realization was that my own sense of being treated unjustly was often based on expectations, that the world should conform to my preferences. When I felt wronged, I was often really feeling frustrated that events had not unfolded according to my desires. The universe owed me nothing, not fair treatment, not recognition for my efforts, not protection from criticism or betrayal. Accepting this truth paradoxically increased my peace of mind and my effectiveness as a leader. I learned to see injustice as a test of character, rather than a reason for despair. Each unfair situation presented a choice. Would I respond with virtue or with vice? Would I become bitter and reactive, or would I maintain my commitment to wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance? The injustice itself was beyond my control, but my response was entirely within my power. This perspective allowed me to maintain hope and energy for positive action, even in the face of persistent unfairness. Instead of wasting mental and emotional resources on resentment about things I could not change, I could invest them in efforts that might actually improve conditions for others. Instead of being paralyzed by the enormity of injustice in the world, I could take whatever steps were within my power to increase fairness and protect the innocent. The ultimate Stoic response to injustice is not resignation, but strategic acceptance. What we cannot change, while working diligently to change what we can, all while maintaining our own virtue regardless of external circumstances. The body and mind are not separate territories, but aspects of a single domain that must be governed with equal attention. During my military campaigns along the Danube, I learned that physical discipline directly strengthened mental resilience, while neglect of the body inevitably weakened the spirit. The emperor who could not endure cold, hunger, or fatigue would struggle to maintain clarity of thought. When these discomforts arose, my daily practice included deliberate exposure to physical challenges that most people in my position could have easily avoided. I would rise before dawn, even when comfortable beds beckoned for more sleep. I would eat simple food when elaborate feasts were available. I would walk in cold rain when carriages offered warm, dry transport. These were not acts of masochism, but training exercises for the will. Each small victory over physical comfort strengthened my ability to choose principle over preference in larger matters. When I could resist the immediate pleasure of extra sleep to maintain my morning philosophical practice, I was more likely to resist the political pleasure of popular but unwise policies. When I could endure hunger without complaint during military campaigns, I was better prepared to endure criticism without defensiveness during political challenges. The Germanic campaigns taught me that physical hardship strips away illusions and reveals character. Soldiers who seemed brave and disciplined in comfortable barracks sometimes collapsed under the stress of cold, wet, hungry conditions. Others, who appeared unremarkable in peacetime, revealed extraordinary resilience when facing genuine adversity. I learned to test my own character regularly through voluntary discomfort, discovering my limits and expanding them gradually. I practiced what I came to call strategic asceticism, deliberately choosing the harder path when both easy and difficult options would achieve the same practical result. When traveling between cities, I would sometimes walk rather than ride, sleep on the ground rather than in tents, eat soldiers' rations rather than imperial cuisine. These choices served no external purpose other than strengthening my capacity to endure whatever circumstances might require. The discipline extended to smaller daily practices that built cumulative strength. I would hold uncomfortable positions during long meetings rather than shifting for relief. I would maintain attention during tedious presentations rather than allowing my mind to wander. I would complete physical exercises even when fatigue urged me to stop early. Each of these small acts of self-mastery created habits that served me in larger challenges. Physical training also provided insight into the nature of discomfort itself. I discovered that most suffering comes not from discomfort, but from resistance to discomfort. When accepting cold as simply a sensation rather than fighting against it, the cold became manageable. When hunger was experienced as information about the body's needs rather than emergency requiring immediate response, hunger lost its power to disturb mental equilibrium. This understanding transformed how I approached all forms of difficulty. Physical pain, emotional distress, social pressure all became simply information to be noted rather than problems to be solved immediately. The body trained to endure taught the mind to observe rather than react, to persist rather than retreat, to choose response rather than submit to impulse. I learned that comfort is seductive but dangerous when pursued as an end in itself. The leader who requires perfect conditions to function effectively will find himself ineffective whenever conditions become imperfect, which they inevitably will. By training in discomfort, I prepared myself to maintain virtue regardless of external circumstances. The practice revealed that most of our supposed physical needs are actually preferences. We believe we need particular foods, specific temperatures, certain types of shelter, but experimentation shows that we can function well with much less than we imagine. This knowledge provides tremendous freedom from the anxiety of losing comforts we thought were essential. Physical discipline also taught patience and persistence. The body does not transform overnight. Muscles strengthen gradually, endurance builds slowly, habits form through repetition over time. This process mirrors the development of character. Virtue cannot be achieved instantly, but grows through consistent practice. The patience required for physical development cultivated patience for philosophical development. Most importantly, I discovered that the body properly trained becomes an ally rather than an obstacle to virtue. Instead of constantly demanding attention through various discomforts and desires, a disciplined body supports mental clarity and emotional stability. Energy spent managing physical impulses becomes available for higher purposes. The goal is not to punish the body or deny its legitimate needs, but to train it to serve virtue rather than competing with virtue for attention. A body accustomed to discomfort will not distract you during crucial decisions. A body trained in discipline will support rather than undermine your commitment to principle. Train your body as you would train a valuable but undisciplined assistant with patience, consistency, and clear expectations. Let physical practice become practice for mental mastery, and discover how deeply the two forms of strength support each other. One of the most powerful tools in my philosophical arsenal was the practice of imagining loss before it occurred. Each morning, I would spend time visualizing the possible disappearance of everything I valued: my health, my family, my position, my life itself. This was not an exercise in pessimism, but preparation for resilience, a way of building strength before strength was needed. The practice began accidentally during the early years of my reign, when plague and war made loss a daily reality. I found myself naturally imagining what would happen if particular advisors died, if certain military campaigns failed, if key alliances dissolved. Rather than allowing these thoughts to create anxiety, I learned to use them as training opportunities for acceptance and adaptation. When visualizing the loss of my position as emperor, I would imagine myself stripped of all authority and wealth, reduced to the status of a common citizen or even a prisoner. In these mental exercises, I would practice maintaining dignity and virtue regardless of external circumstances. Could I remain committed to justice if justice could no longer be enforced through imperial power? Could I maintain courage if courage no longer brought me honor and recognition? These visualizations revealed which aspects of my character were truly independent of external support. The exercise extended to material possessions. I would imagine losing the palace, the imperial regalia, the vast treasures accumulated over generations. In these mental scenarios, I practiced feeling gratitude for what remained rather than grief for what was lost. I discovered that most of what I thought I needed for happiness was actually optional, that contentment could exist with far fewer possessions than I had imagined necessary. Perhaps most challenging was visualizing the death of people I loved. I would imagine receiving news that my wife Faustina had died, that my children would not return from their travels, that trusted friends had been killed in distant provinces. These exercises were painful but valuable. They prepared me to appreciate these relationships fully while they existed, and to face their inevitable end with acceptance rather than bitter rebellion against fate. The practice taught me to distinguish between appreciation and attachment. Appreciation involves recognizing and enjoying the value of what we have. Attachment involves believing we cannot be happy without it. Through negative visualization, I learned to increase appreciation while reducing attachment, to love deeply, while holding lightly when actual losses occurred. And they occurred frequently during my reign. Found myself better prepared than I would have been without this practice. The death of several of my children, though devastating, did not destroy my ability to function as emperor, because I had already rehearsed mentally how to carry such grief while continuing to serve virtue. Military defeats, though disappointing, did not crush my spirit, because I had already imagined how to maintain hope and strategic thinking even in the face of setbacks. The visualization practice also revealed the temporary nature of all external circumstances. When imagining the loss of imperial power, I would remind myself that this position was always temporary. No emperor rules forever, and death would eventually strip away all earthly authority regardless. This perspective made current political challenges less overwhelming and helped me use power more wisely while I possessed it. I learned to apply the practice to daily irritations, as well as major potential losses. When dealing with a particularly difficult senator, I would imagine what I would miss about our interactions if he died tomorrow. This exercise often revealed positive qualities I had overlooked and helped me respond to his challenging behavior with greater patience and understanding. The practice required careful balance. Too much focus on potential loss could create unnecessary anxiety and prevent full engagement with present opportunities. Too little preparation for change could leave one vulnerable to being overwhelmed when loss inevitably occurred. I learned to use negative visualization as a tool for strengthening appreciation and resilience, rather than feeding worry and withdrawal. One unexpected benefit was that the practice made ordinary moments extraordinary. When I had imagined losing the ability to walk through my garden, actual walks became profoundly meaningful experiences. When I had visualized never again having conversations with particular friends, time spent with them became precious beyond measure. Negative visualization paradoxically increased my capacity for joy by helping me recognize how remarkable ordinary experiences truly are. The ultimate purpose of this practice is not to become pessimistic about the future, but realistic about impermanence. Everything you currently possess, your health, your relationships, your circumstances, will eventually change or disappear. This is not a tragedy, but simply the nature of existence. By accepting this truth and preparing for it mentally, you can experience your current blessings more fully and face inevitable changes with greater equanimity. Practice imagining loss, not to attract it, but to appreciate what remains and build the resilience that will serve you when change comes. In this preparation lies both wisdom and freedom. Leading an empire taught me that true authority comes not from the power to command, but from the character to serve. The greatest leaders I observed throughout history were those who understood that their position existed to benefit others, not themselves. This principle transformed how I approached every aspect of imperial governance and created the foundation for what I came to understand as Stoic leadership. The first principle of Stoic leadership is leading by example rather than decree. When I wanted my generals to show courage in battle, I joined them on the front lines rather than commanding from safety. When I expected senators to work diligently for the public good, I demonstrated that dedication through my own tireless attention to imperial duties. When I asked citizens to endure hardships for the greater welfare of Rome, I shared those hardships rather than exempting myself through privilege. This approach required constantly asking myself, am I willing to do what I am asking others to do? Can I demonstrate the virtue I expect from those I lead? If I could not honestly answer yes to these questions, I had to either change my expectations or change my own behavior. Leadership through example eliminates the hypocrisy that destroys trust and respect between leaders and followers. I learned that Stoic leadership begins with rigorous self-leadership. Before attempting to guide others toward virtue, I had to establish virtue consistently in my own thoughts and actions. This meant examining my motives honestly, acknowledging my mistakes openly, and working continuously to align my behavior with my stated principles. A leader who cannot govern himself cannot effectively govern others. The practice of evening self-examination became crucial for maintaining this self-leadership. Each night, I would review the day's decisions and interactions. Had I acted from wisdom or impulse? Had my choices served the common good or my personal preferences? Where had I succeeded in modeling virtue, and where had I fallen short? This honest assessment allowed me to correct course quickly rather than allowing small character failings to grow into larger leadership problems. Stoic leadership also requires accepting responsibility without claiming credit. When military campaigns succeeded, I recognized the skill and courage of commanders and soldiers, rather than attributing victory to my strategic brilliance. When policies improved conditions for citizens, I acknowledged the advisors and administrators who had developed and implemented those policies. But when decisions led to negative outcomes, I took full responsibility rather than deflecting blame onto subordinates. This approach created loyalty that could not be purchased or commanded. People will follow leaders who protect them from unfair criticism and share credit for successes, but they will die for leaders who shield them from consequences while taking personal responsibility for failures. True authority grows from this kind of character-based leadership rather than position-based power. I discovered that the most effective way to influence others was through questions rather than commands. Instead of simply ordering governors to improve tax collection, I would ask them to analyze what factors made collection difficult in their provinces and propose solutions. Instead of dictating military strategy to generals, I would invite them to explain their assessment of enemy strengths and weaknesses. This approach engaged their intelligence and judgment, making them partners in problem-solving rather than mere executors of orders. The Stoic leader also accepts that he cannot control outcomes, only his own efforts and decisions. This perspective liberated me from the anxiety that paralyzes many leaders, the fear that any mistake will be catastrophic. I could make the best decisions possible with available information, implement them with full commitment, and accept whatever results emerged without being crushed by setbacks or intoxicated by successes. This acceptance of limited control also taught me to prepare successors rather than trying to maintain power indefinitely. A truly successful leader creates systems and develops people who can continue his work after he is gone. I invested significant energy in training capable administrators, developing wise policies that would outlast my reign, and establishing precedents that future emperors could follow even if they lacked my particular strengths. Perhaps most importantly, Stoic leadership requires serving something larger than yourself. My personal comfort, reputation, and desires became secondary to the welfare of Rome and its people. This did not mean neglecting my own legitimate needs, but it meant that when conflicts arose between personal preference and public duty, duty always took precedence. Leaders who use their position primarily for personal benefit inevitably lose the respect and cooperation essential for effective leadership. I learned to see leadership as a form of philosophical practice and ongoing opportunity to implement virtue in practical situations that affected real people. Every decision became a test of justice. Was this choice fair to all parties involved? Every crisis became an opportunity for courage. Would I face difficult circumstances with integrity? Every success became a practice in temperance. Would I remain humble and focused on service rather than personal glory? The ultimate test of Stoic leadership is whether your influence helps others develop their own virtue and capability. The leader who creates dependence has failed. The leader who creates independence has succeeded. The greatest legacy any leader can leave is people who no longer need him because they have learned to lead themselves according to the same principles he modeled. Lead through character rather than authority. Serve rather than command, and measure success not by what you accomplish, but by what you enable others to accomplish. In this approach lies both effective leadership and personal fulfillment. The greatest revelation of my philosophical journey was discovering that happiness had been within reach all along, hidden not in external achievements or acquisitions, but in the simple practice of virtue itself. While others sought joy in wealth, power, or pleasure, I found it in justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance qualities available to any person, regardless of circumstances. This discovery came gradually, through years of testing other sources of satisfaction. Imperial power brought responsibility but not contentment. Vast wealth provided security but not peace. Public acclaim offered momentary pleasure but not lasting fulfillment. Each of these external goods proved temporary and conditional, dependent on circumstances beyond my control. But virtue offered something different, a form of satisfaction that increased rather than diminished with practice. I began to notice how good it felt to act justly, even when justice was difficult or unpopular. When I made decisions based on fairness rather than political advantage. When I treated humble petitioners with the same respect I showed to powerful senators. When I chose truth over convenience in difficult situations, I experienced a deep sense of alignment that no external reward could match. The satisfaction came not from others' approval, but from knowing I had acted according to my highest principles. Courage brought similar joy, though the word joy might seem strange in connection with facing danger or difficulty. But there was profound satisfaction in choosing the right action despite fear, in standing by principles despite opposition, in maintaining hope despite setbacks. Each act of courage strengthened something essential within me, creating a sense of self-respect that external circumstances could not touch. Wisdom yielded perhaps the most subtle but enduring form of happiness. The growing ability to see situations clearly, to understand the connections between events, to respond appropriately to whatever arose. This brought a quiet satisfaction that pervaded daily life. When I could help others solve problems, when I could learn from difficulties rather than simply enduring them, when I could maintain perspective during both triumphs and defeats, I felt the deep contentment that comes from using human faculties as they were meant to be used. Even temperance, which might seem to involve denying pleasure, actually increased my capacity for authentic enjoyment. When I ate simply, food tasted better. When I slept on hard ground during military campaigns, I appreciated comfort more when it was available. When I practiced moderation in all things, I could enjoy pleasures without being enslaved by them or anxious about losing them. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of constantly seeking external sources of happiness, approval, achievement, acquisition, I began finding satisfaction in the process of living itself. Each day offered opportunities to practice virtue, regardless of what external events occurred. A difficult meeting became a chance to practice patience. A political setback became an opportunity to demonstrate resilience. A personal criticism became a moment to model dignity. Under attack, this shift eliminated the anxiety that had previously accompanied my pursuit of happiness. When joy depends on external circumstances, you must constantly worry about losing those circumstances. But when satisfaction comes from virtue, you carry the source of happiness within yourself. No one can strip away your capacity for justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance unless you surrender it voluntarily. I discovered that virtue creates a positive cycle. Acting virtuously makes you happier, and being happier makes it easier to act virtuously. When I started each day committed to treating people fairly, facing challenges bravely, learning from experience, and maintaining balance, the resulting satisfaction motivated me to continue these practices. Virtue became self-reinforcing rather than effortful. The practice also revealed how much unnecessary suffering I had created by pursuing happiness in the wrong places. When I measured my worth by military victories, defeats became personal catastrophes. When I based my satisfaction on others' opinions, criticism became emotional devastation. When I tied my happiness to circumstances remaining constant, any change threatened my peace of mind. Virtue freed me from these psychological traps. I learned to find joy in small daily acts of virtue that others might consider insignificant. Listening patiently to a worried citizen's complaint, making a fair decision in a minor dispute, maintaining courtesy when others were rude, choosing accuracy over flattery in difficult conversations. These simple choices became sources of quiet satisfaction that accumulated into lasting contentment. Perhaps most surprisingly, I found that virtue-based happiness was contagious. When I approached interactions with genuine care for justice and wisdom, others often responded with their own better nature. When I maintained good humor despite setbacks, it helped others keep perspective during their own difficulties. Joy that comes from virtue naturally spreads to those around you, creating positive effects far beyond your own experience. The ultimate insight was that virtue is both the means and the end, both the path to happiness and happiness itself. We do not practice virtue in order to become happy. We practice virtue as the very expression of human happiness properly understood. Joy comes not from achieving virtue, but from exercising it, not from reaching a destination, but from walking the path with integrity. Choose virtue for its own sake, and discover that you have chosen happiness as well. In this choice lies both the simplest and most profound secret of a life well lived. The measure of a philosopher is not whether he faces adversity. We all do, but how he transforms adversity into wisdom and strength. Throughout my reign, I encountered defeats that could have broken lesser men, military campaigns that failed despite careful planning, political allies who betrayed my trust, policies that produced unintended consequences, and personal losses that struck at the heart of everything I valued. Each setback presented a choice. Would I be diminished by it, or would I use it as raw material for growth? The Germanic campaigns taught me my first great lesson about setbacks. After months of preparation, what seemed like a decisive battle ended in costly defeat when enemy reinforcements arrived unexpectedly. My initial reaction was a mixture of rage, frustration, and despair. How could such careful planning result in such failure? How could I justify the loss of so many good soldiers? How could I face Rome with news of defeat rather than the victory everyone expected? But as I sat in my tent that night, surrounded by the sounds of retreat and the smell of funeral pyres, I began to apply the philosophical principles I had studied in peaceful times. What exactly had happened? We had made decisions based on the best available information, executed them with competence and courage, and encountered variables beyond our control. The outcome was disappointing, But was there anything inherently shameful about it? Were there lessons that could prevent similar failures in the future? This process of dispassionate analysis transformed defeat into education. We had underestimated enemy communication networks, overestimated the reliability of our intelligence sources, and placed too much confidence in our ability to control timing. These were correctable mistakes, not character flaws or divine punishment. The setback became a tutorial in military strategy rather than a verdict on our worth as leaders. I learnt to approach all setbacks with what I came to call philosophical archaeology, digging through the rubble of failure to find the valuable materials that could be used for reconstruction. Every defeat contained useful information about reality, about the limits of our control, about the gap between our expectations, and what was actually possible. Mining this information required setting aside ego and emotion to examine events with scientific curiosity. The practice revealed that setbacks often result from invisible weaknesses that success would never expose. The military defeat revealed flaws in our intelligence gathering that had been masked by previous victories. Political failures exposed gaps in my understanding of senatorial concerns that had been hidden during periods of general support. Personal disappointments uncovered attachments and expectations that needed examination and adjustment. I began to welcome setbacks as diagnostic tools that revealed problems before they became catastrophic. A small defeat in a minor skirmish might expose strategic thinking errors that could be corrected before a major campaign. A failed policy in one province might reveal implementation flaws that could be addressed before expanding the policy. Early failures became gifts that prevented larger failures. The Stoic approach to setbacks also requires accepting responsibility without accepting shame. When campaigns failed under my leadership, I needed to acknowledge my role in the failure. Honestly, what decisions had I made that contributed to the negative outcome? What could I have done differently? This acceptance of responsibility was essential for learning and improvement. But I learned to separate responsibility from self-condemnation. Making mistakes does not make you a mistake. Failing at tasks does not make you a failure as a person. I discovered that setbacks become devastating only when we resist them or interpret them as evidence of our fundamental inadequacy. When approached with acceptance and curiosity, they become simply information about how reality works. The military defeat taught us about enemy capabilities. The political failure taught us about the complexity of governing diverse populations. The personal loss taught us about the temporary nature of all external goods. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that setbacks test and strengthen character in ways that success never can. Easy victories might increase confidence, but difficult defeats reveal what you are truly made of. Do you maintain virtue when virtue brings no reward? Do you persist in doing right when doing right leads to criticism and failure? Do you continue serving others when service results in ingratitude and opposition? These tests were valuable beyond measure. Each time I maintained integrity despite setbacks, I proved to myself that my commitment to virtue was genuine rather than conditional. Each time I responded to failure with renewed effort rather than bitter withdrawal, I strengthened my capacity for resilience. Each time I learned from defeat rather than repeating it, I demonstrated that wisdom could grow from any experience. The ultimate insight was that the distinction between success and failure is often artificial and temporary. What appears to be defeat in the short term might prove to be victory in the longer view. The military setback that taught us better strategy contributed to later victories. The political failure that revealed hidden opposition allowed us to address concerns we had not known existed. The personal loss that forced philosophical growth prepared us for greater challenges ahead. Approach setbacks as opportunities rather than punishments, as teachers rather than enemies, as raw material for growth rather than evidence of inadequacy. In this approach lies the difference between being broken by adversity and being strengthened by it. Every setback you face is a chance to prove that your character is stronger than your circumstances. Asterisk philosophy without practice is merely intellectual entertainment. The Stoic principles I have shared throughout these pages become transformative only when they are woven into the fabric of daily life through consistent, deliberate action. Creating a sustainable daily practice that can survive the pressures and distractions of ordinary life became one of my most important achievements as both emperor and philosopher. The foundation of any effective daily practice is simplicity. During my early years of philosophical study, I attempted elaborate routines that required perfect conditions and abundant time. These ambitious practices collapsed the moment imperial duties intensified or unexpected crises arose. I learned that sustainable practice must be adaptable to any circumstances, requiring no special equipment, location, or extended periods of uninterrupted time. My morning routine became the cornerstone of daily Stoic practice. Before attending to any imperial business, I would spend a few moments in quiet reflection, setting the philosophical tone for the entire day. This was not lengthy meditation, but focused preparation, reminding myself of what lay within my control, preparing for the people I would encounter, reinforcing my commitment to virtue, and accepting whatever the day might bring. The morning practice included 3 essential elements that anyone can adapt to their circumstances. First, I would recall my mortality, not with morbid fascination, but with clarifying urgency. This might be my last day, I would remind myself, so let me live it according to my highest principles. Second, I would prepare for human imperfection by expecting to encounter selfishness, ingratitude, and confusion, while committing to respond with patience and understanding. Third, I would focus on my sphere of control, distinguishing between what I could influence and what I must accept. Throughout the day, I developed the habit of brief philosophical check-ins, moments of pause, to apply Stoic principles to immediate situations. When facing a difficult decision, I would ask, what would virtue choose here? When encountering frustrating people, I would remind myself, their behavior reflects their character, not mine. When experiencing setbacks, I would consider, what can this teach me? These micro-practices required only seconds, but maintained philosophical awareness during busy periods. Evening reflection became equally important for consolidating the day's lessons and preparing for continued growth. Each night, I would review my thoughts, decisions, and actions with honest assessment. Where had I succeeded in applying Stoic principles? Where had I fallen short? What patterns were emerging in my behavior? What adjustments might improve tomorrow's practice? This evening review was not self-criticism, but scientific observation. I approached my own behavior with the same curiosity I might bring to studying any natural phenomenon, seeking to understand patterns and test improvements. When I noticed that certain types of situations consistently triggered reactive responses, I could prepare specific strategies for handling them more skillfully in the future. I learned to integrate philosophical practice into routine activities, rather than treating it as a separate addition to an already full schedule. Walking from one meeting to another became an opportunity to practice mindful attention to the present moment. Waiting for delayed appointments became time for contemplating the virtue of patience. Even mundane administrative tasks became opportunities to practice careful attention and thoroughness as expressions of virtue. The practice evolved to include what I called Stoic experiments, deliberately applying specific principles in particular situations to test their effectiveness. For 1 week, I might focus on responding to criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness. For another period, I might practice finding something to appreciate in every person I encountered, no matter how difficult they seemed initially. Reading played a crucial role in maintaining daily practice. Each morning, I would read a brief passage from Stoic texts, sometimes just a single sentence, and carry that idea with me throughout the day as a theme for reflection and application. The writings of Epictetus, Seneca, and other philosophers became daily companions, offering wisdom and encouragement for whatever challenges arose. I discovered that consistency mattered more than duration. A few minutes of genuine philosophical practice each day proved more valuable than sporadic, longer sessions. The daily habit created momentum that made Stoic thinking increasingly natural and automatic. Over time, the principles became so integrated into my thinking that I applied them instinctively rather than having to remember them consciously. The practice required adaptation to changing circumstances. During military campaigns, my morning routine might be shortened but never eliminated entirely. During political crises, evening reflection might be brief but remained consistent. During illness or travel, the practices took modified forms but continued in some way. This flexibility prevented perfectionism from becoming the enemy of progress. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to approach daily practice with patience and self-compassion. There were days when I forgot philosophical principles entirely, reacting from emotion rather than wisdom. There were periods when the practices felt mechanical rather than meaningful. There were times when I questioned whether any of this made a real difference. These struggles were part of the path, not deviations from it. The ultimate goal of daily practice is not perfection, but progress, gradually becoming more skilled at applying virtue to real-life situations, more resilient in facing challenges, more peaceful in accepting what cannot be changed. The practices I have described are starting points, not final destinations. Adapt them to your circumstances. Experiment with what works best for your temperament, and commit to consistency over intensity. Begin where you are, with what you have, for whatever time you can spare. The path of daily philosophical practice transforms both ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges into opportunities for wisdom and growth. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As I near the end of both my reign and my life, I find myself contemplating not what I have achieved, but what I have become, and more importantly, what influence this becoming might have on others long after my physical presence has ended. The true measure of a philosophical life is not personal tranquility, though. That is a worthy outcome, but the positive ripple effects that extend far beyond our individual existence. Living according to Stoic principles creates what I have come to understand as an expanding circle of virtue. When you respond to hostility with patience, you model for others that such responses are possible. When you face setbacks with resilience, you demonstrate that circumstances need not determine character. When you treat all people with dignity, regardless of their status, you establish new patterns of interaction that others may choose to emulate. I have watched this process unfold countless times during my reign. A senator who initially opposed my policies began treating his own subordinates more fairly after observing how I handled disagreement with respect rather than retaliation. A general who had been known for harsh discipline became more patient with struggling soldiers after witnessing how philosophical approaches to leadership could maintain both standards and morale. These changes were not dramatic conversions, but gradual shifts toward virtue inspired by consistent example. The ripple effects extend beyond direct observation. When you practice Stoic principles consistently, you create an atmosphere around yourself that invites others' better nature to emerge. People feel safer expressing honest opinions when they trust they will be heard fairly. They are more likely to take responsibility for mistakes when they know blame will not be used as a weapon. They show greater courage when they see courage modeled regularly without fanfare or self-congratulation. Living the Stoic legacy means understanding that your primary influence comes not through your words, but through your daily choices. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to plant seeds of virtue that may not flower until long after you are gone. The citizen you treat with patience today may remember that treatment and extend similar consideration to others in the future. The subordinate you mentor with wisdom may carry those lessons into leadership positions where they can influence hundreds or thousands of others. This understanding transforms how you approach even apparently insignificant moments. The brief conversation with a servant, the response to an unexpected delay, the reaction to minor criticism will become opportunities to demonstrate that virtue is possible in ordinary circumstances. People are always watching, often unconsciously, to see how others handle the small challenges that make up most of life. I have learned that living a philosophical legacy requires accepting that you may never see the full results of your influence. The emperor whose policies I implemented decades ago could not have known how they would affect citizens I have never met. Similarly, the example I set today may inspire changes in people whose names I will never learn, in circumstances I cannot imagine. This uncertainty requires faith in the inherent value of virtue regardless of visible outcomes. The legacy perspective also provides comfort during difficult periods, when virtue seems unrewarded and vice appears to prosper. When you understand that your primary purpose is to contribute to the long-term elevation of human character rather than to achieve immediate personal benefits, temporary setbacks become less discouraging. You are participating in a project much larger than your individual life, the gradual improvement of human civilization through the patient practice of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Living this legacy requires humility about your role in the larger story. You are neither the first nor the last person to face the choice between virtue and convenience, between principle and popularity, between service and selfishness. Others before you have chosen virtue despite difficulty, making it easier for you to do the same. Others after you will face similar choices, and your example may influence their decisions, even though you will never know it. The practice involves consciously considering the long-term implications of your choices when deciding how to respond. To betrayal, ask not only what serves justice in the immediate situation, but what response models the kind of world you want to help create. When choosing between comfort and duty, consider not only your personal preferences, but what example you want to set for those who may follow your path. I have found great satisfaction in this expanded perspective on the purpose of philosophical practice. Instead of focusing primarily on my own peace of mind or personal development, I can see my daily choices as contributions to something magnificent and enduring, the ongoing human project of learning to live wisely and well. This sense of participation in a larger purpose gives meaning to struggles that might otherwise seem pointless. The Stoic legacy is not about achieving fame or recognition for your virtue. Most of the people who have influenced you most positively probably remain unknown to history. Teachers who showed you patience, parents who modeled integrity, strangers who demonstrated kindness. These individuals shaped your character without seeking lasting recognition. You have the opportunity to play a similar role in the development of others, contributing to virtue without requiring acknowledgement. As I prepare to leave this world, I am at peace knowing that the principles I have tried to embody will continue working through others long after my voice falls silent. The example of facing death with acceptance, of maintaining virtue under pressure, of serving something larger than oneself. These demonstrations become part of the collective human understanding of what is possible. Live as if your choices matter beyond your lifetime, because they do. In every moment of virtue, you contribute to the elevation of human consciousness and the gradual improvement of our shared world. Asterisk, asterisk, as I write these final words, I do so not as an emperor addressing subjects, but as one human being speaking to another across the centuries that separate us. Death approaches not as an enemy to be feared, but as the natural completion of a life lived according to philosophical principles. In these last moments of reflection, I want to share with you the peace that comes from a life aligned with virtue and the hope I hold for your own journey forward. The transformation that Stoic practice has brought to my life exceeds anything I could have imagined when I first began studying philosophy. The anxious young man who reluctantly accepted imperial power has become someone who can face death with genuine tranquility. The reactive leader who once let emotions drive decisions has learned to respond from wisdom and principle. The person who sought happiness in external achievements has discovered joy in the simple practice of virtue. This transformation is available to anyone willing to commit to the patient work of philosophical practice. What strikes me most profoundly as I review my life is how the principles we have explored together, the inner citadel, the discipline of perception, the acceptance of mortality, the mastery of emotions, have proven reliable companions through every circumstance I have faced. In times of triumph, they prevented arrogance. In times of defeat, they provided resilience. In times of criticism, they offered perspective. In times of loss, they brought acceptance. These tools have never failed me when I remembered to use them. The journey you are beginning as you implement these practices will be uniquely your own, but you will not walk it alone. You join a community that stretches back centuries and extends into the future people who have chosen virtue over convenience, wisdom over ignorance, service over selfishness. We are united not by shared circumstances, but by shared commitment to living according to our highest understanding of what it means to be human. You will face challenges I never encountered and discover applications of Stoic principles that my circumstances never required. The external conditions of your life will differ dramatically from mine, but the internal work remains the same. Learning to distinguish between what you can and cannot control, accepting what cannot be changed while working diligently to influence what can be changed, maintaining virtue regardless of external circumstances, and finding meaning through service to something larger than yourself. There will be days when the practices feel difficult or meaningless, when virtue seems unrewarded and philosophy appears to offer little practical help. These moments are not failures, but tests, opportunities to prove that your commitment to wisdom runs deeper than temporary feelings or immediate circumstances. Persist through these periods, and you will discover reserves of strength you did not know you possessed. Remember that perfection is not the goal. Progress is. Every moment you choose patience over anger, acceptance over resistance, virtue over convenience, you strengthen your philosophical muscles and contribute to your own transformation. The compound effect of these daily choices will surprise you with its power. The person you become through consistent practice will be someone you can respect and admire, not because you never make mistakes, but because you learn from them and continue growing. The world needs people who have learned to live wisely. In our age, as in mine, there is no shortage of those who can criticize, complain, or despair about circumstances beyond their control. There is no surplus of those who can maintain hope without naivety, who can work for improvement without being crushed by setbacks, who can lead through character rather than force. Your development as a practitioner of Stoic principles serves not only your own well-being, but the elevation of everyone whose life you touch as you move forward. Carry with you the knowledge that philosophical practice is not a burden, but a gift, the gift of learning to live with wisdom, courage, justice, and moderation, regardless of what life presents. These principles have sustained me through the responsibilities of empire and will sustain you through whatever responsibilities and opportunities await you. I leave you with this final thought. The same capacity for reason, virtue, and transcendence that allowed an ancient Roman emperor to find peace and meaning is present within you. The circumstances may change, but the fundamental human ability to choose wisdom over folly, love over hatred, hope over despair remains constant. Trust in this capacity, develop it through daily practice, and use it in service of the highest good you can envision. The conversation between us ends here, but your dialogue with Stoic wisdom has only begun. May you find in this philosophy the same transformation, peace, and purpose that it has brought to countless others across the generations. May your life become a testament to the power of virtue and an inspiration to those who will follow your example. Go forward with confidence, knowing that you carry within yourself everything needed for a life of meaning and fulfillment.